It was barely 5 in the morning, and the house still smelled like sleep and last night's rain. I moved through the kitchen on autopilot, heels on hardwood, coffee brewing, suitcase waiting by the door. Lucas was right there, just like always. He handed me my favorite mug without asking, zipped up my suitcase, and smiled like this was just another Tuesday. And maybe it was. We had a routine, and honestly, it worked. There was comfort in the familiarity, in how he always knew what I needed before I said a word. I kissed him goodbye, quick, warm, like we always did. He tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, the way he used to when we first met. I smiled, not because the moment was grand, but because it was ours. Reliable. Normal. And in this messy world, I counted that as a blessing. I grabbed my bag, whispered something about texting when I landed, and headed out the door. The city was still half asleep, and for a second, so was I. But as I climbed into the cab and watched the lights blur past the window, I remember thinking, I'm lucky. Lucky to have a man I can count on. Lucky to know what I'm coming home to. It wasn't fireworks, but it was trust. Or at least, that's what I thought. That morning, I had no idea what was already in motion back home. The cab smelled faintly of leather and pine air freshener, one of those little green trees swinging from the mirror. I watched the driver in the rear view as he nodded along to some AM radio show, not saying much, which I appreciated. My mind was already halfway through the pitch I'd be giving in a few hours. Projected numbers, market shifts, polished smiles. But under all that, there was this low hum of contentment. I had a good job, a solid marriage, a life that made sense. And these early flights? Just part of the package. I scrolled through my phone, answering a few emails, deleting some junk, and sending Lucas a heart emoji. Something small, but ours. He always said I worked too hard, but he never made me feel guilty for it. That meant more to me than he probably knew. We'd been through rough patches, sure. Who hasn't? But we always circled back to each other, like gravity. He made me feel anchored, safe. Like no matter how chaotic the world got, there was one person who'd never surprise me. That morning, I wasn't second-guessing anything. Not the flight, not the marriage, not the way his eyes met mine when I left. If anything, I felt a little guilty for how easily I slid into work mode while he stayed behind. But Lucas was the kind of man who held down the fort. He didn't need grand declarations. He just showed up. Always. That's what I kept telling myself as the airport signs came into view and the sun began to rise behind the skyline. Inside the terminal, everything moved in fast forward. Luggage wheels clattering, boarding calls echoing, the smell of burnt espresso from the nearby cafe. I checked in, breezed through security, and found a quiet corner near my gate. I exhaled. My shoulders finally dropped. These were the moments I liked, the in-betweens, the pause before the performance. I pulled out my phone again, not to check work this time, but just to look at a photo of Lucas and me from our last anniversary. Smiling. Holding hands, steady. Sometimes I wondered if we'd gotten too used to the rhythm of things, too comfortable. But then again, isn't that what people crave? A life that doesn't feel like a constant question mark? We didn't have wild passion, not anymore. But we had reliability, history, the kind of love that ages into something quieter, more grounded. I never once believed he'd risk any of that. Not Lucas. Not the man who always remembered to refill my vitamins and warm up the car when it was cold. I took one last sip of my coffee and smiled to myself. You're lucky, I thought. Not everyone gets this kind of love. As the boarding announcement rang out overhead, I reached for my bag, ready to chase another goal, another meeting, another checkmark on the life we were building. I had no idea what was about to flash across my screen, or how quickly everything would shift from ordinary to unforgettable. I was half listening to the final boarding call when my phone buzzed. Nothing unusual, just a push notification from the security app we'd installed months ago after a neighbor had a break-in. Motion detected. Living room camera. I almost ignored it. Those alerts were usually just shadows or the cat from next door triggering something through the window. But something made me tap. Maybe boredom, maybe habit. Maybe intuition, quietly knocking. I opened the app expecting nothing. The screen took a second to load. A swirl of static, then clarity. And what I saw didn't make sense, at first. There she was, in my living room, laughing like she'd been there 100 times before. Natalie, his ex. The one who used to show up in awkward stories and forced reassurances. The one who, according to him, was ancient history. My stomach didn't drop. It twisted, clenched, and sat like a stone. I didn't blink. Couldn't. Lucas walked in frame a second later. No hesitation, no confusion, just familiarity. The way he hugged her. Too long, too close, too easy. Like it wasn't the first time. Like he didn't have a wife en route to another city, trusting him completely. I kept watching, even when I wanted to look away. Every second chipped at something I thought was solid. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't innocent. This was betrayal, raw and real, and I was watching it live. I froze in that plastic airport chair, surrounded by strangers sipping lattes and flipping through boarding passes, while my entire world cracked open in my hands. I didn't cry. I didn't make a sound. But inside, something snapped, quietly, like glass under pressure. I kept watching the footage, needing to see more, even as my heart screamed for me to shut it off. Natalie sat on our couch. My couch. She looked so at ease, like she belonged, like she never left. Lucas poured her coffee from the French press he and I used every Sunday. That detail hit me like a punch. The smallest things always do. She smiled at him, touched his arm like it was muscle memory, and he didn't pull away. He leaned in, said something I couldn't hear, and she laughed again. God, that laugh. It sounded like mockery now. I was watching them play house in the ruins of mine. They had no idea I was seeing every second of it. No idea the lie had already shattered. And yet, even then, I didn't panic. I didn't text him. I didn't call. What was there to say? That I saw him for who he really was? That the man I kissed goodbye had barely waited for the door to close behind me? No, this wasn't a moment for begging or breakdowns. This was the moment I decided something else. Something colder, sharper. I closed the app, sat up straighter, and for the first time in a long time, I stopped being the woman who trusted. The gate agent called my row, and people started lining up with backpacks and sleepy smiles. I just sat there, perfectly still. I looked like any other traveler about to board a plane, but inside, I was rerouting. Every instinct in me was suddenly alert, sharp, focused. I watched them one last time, those two ghosts dancing in my living room. Then I hit record. I saved the footage and emailed it to myself, twice. Once to my inbox, once to a folder Lucas didn't even know existed. I stood up slowly, walked past the boarding lane, and headed straight to the customer service desk. My voice was steady, even kind, when I said, "I won't be taking this flight anymore." The agent blinked at me, surprised. "Is there a reason?" I smiled softly. "Just a change of plans." She had no idea. No one did. But in my gut, I knew. I wasn't flying away from anything. I was flying straight into the truth, and this time, I wouldn't miss. As I walked back through the terminal, my heels echoed with purpose. I wasn't devastated. Not yet. That would come later, maybe. But in that moment, I was wide awake. And one thing became painfully, beautifully clear. I wasn't going to confront him. Not just yet. I was going to destroy the illusion, piece by piece, and make sure they both saw exactly who they'd underestimated. The cab ride home was quiet, too quiet for the storm I felt brewing inside. I stared out the window as the city rushed by, glass and concrete blurring into streaks of light. My mind wasn't racing, it was calculating. I wasn't crying or shaking or screaming into the void like the movies tell you should. No, I was still, focused, and weirdly calm. Sometimes when the truth finally burns through, the heat doesn't scorch, it clarifies. I wasn't going to fall apart. I was going to act. First, I pulled up the footage again, not because I needed to see it, but because I needed to own it. I hit download, then uploaded it to a hidden cloud folder I'd used once during a messy merger at work. Old habits die hard. I backed it up twice more, email, flash drive. Whatever happened next, that proof would never disappear. This wasn't paranoia, it was insurance, evidence, and honestly, a small taste of control in a moment where everything else had been ripped from under me. Then I opened my messages and typed 3 words to my assistant. Cancel my meetings. I added, family emergency, and hit send. Technically true, if you consider the crumbling of everything you trusted a family matter. I stared at my reflection in the cab's glass. Same face, same blazer. But something had shifted. Something permanent. I wasn't going home to ask for an explanation. I was going to deliver one. I started rehearsing what I'd say. Not a speech, but a moment. A moment he'd never forget. No screaming, no chaos. That would be too easy. I wanted silence, precision. I wanted him to feel the weight of my stillness, to hear his own guilt echo in the quiet I'd leave behind. This wasn't just about Natalie. It was about every time he looked me in the eye and lied. Every morning kiss wrapped in routine, every "I love you" that now rang hollow in my ears. The cab slowed as we turned onto our street. Trees swayed gently in the wind. Birds still sang like the world hadn't just cracked in two. Everything looked the same. Our house sat there peacefully, like it wasn't hiding something rotten inside. I rolled down the window just a little. I wanted to feel the air, cold, honest. At least the wind never lied. I paid the driver, stepped out, and stood at the curb for a second longer than necessary, centering myself. I reached for the handle of my suitcase, the same one Lucas had packed just a couple of hours ago, completely unaware. That detail wasn't lost on me. There was something poetic about dragging the bag he so carefully zipped shut right back into the mess he created. I walked up the steps slowly, key already in hand, pulse steady. No hesitation, no fear. Just me, my truth, and the sharp edge of clarity ready to slice the air the moment I opened that door. The moment I stepped inside, the house greeted me like nothing had happened. Same scent of citrus cleaner, same framed photos on the entry table, Lucas and me in Paris, grinning like the future was ours. I didn't stop to stare. I knew better now. I walked through each room like I was flipping a switch in my brain. Kitchen, deception, hallway, denial, living room, truth. It was all right there. And soon, he would see it too. Not just see it, feel it. I placed my suitcase down quietly, not because I was hiding, but because I wanted the weight of that silence to grow. I could hear faint laughter coming from the living room. Hers. Still. That was almost amusing, in a twisted way. She was comfortable enough to laugh, to make herself at home in my space. I took out my phone. Not to call. Not yet. Just to make sure the video file was ready, right there at my fingertips. One play button away. I stood at the edge of the room, where hardwood met carpet, just out of sight. One deep breath. My heart wasn't pounding. It was steady, like a drumbeat before battle. I didn't storm in. I walked, calm, controlled. The kind of calm that comes after everything inside you has already been set on fire. They didn't hear me at first, but they would. They were about to witness the final flight I ever missed, and what happened when I landed on my terms. He looked up first. I saw the flicker in his eyes. Recognition, then confusion, then fear. Natalie turned, still smiling, until she saw me. Her expression dropped so fast it was almost satisfying. I stood there, suitcase by my side, one hand in my coat pocket, the other holding my phone. No yelling, no theatrics, just presence. My presence. And it filled the room like a flood. Lucas opened his mouth to speak, but I beat him to it. "Don't," I said. Just that. One word. Enough to make him shut his mouth like a slammed door. Natalie stepped back slightly, unsure now. Good. I walked in slowly, letting the silence wrap around them like a noose. I looked at Lucas like I was looking at a stranger. Not someone I once trusted. Not someone who used to trace circles on my back at night. Just a man who'd mistaken my love for stupidity. And that mistake? It was about to cost him. He tried again, voice softer now, reaching for me like that would make it better. "It's not what it looks like," he said. I met his eyes, steady, and then I said, almost kindly, "Then let me show you what it does look like." I opened the video, pressed play, and let them both watch, every second of it. No fast forward, no pause. Just truth, raw and unedited, right there on the same couch they'd defiled. And for once, they had nothing to say. They stood frozen, like kids caught with their hands in something they swore they didn't touch. Natalie looked everywhere but at me. Lucas, though, he kept trying to hold my gaze, as if there was still a version of us he could salvage with the right words. There wasn't. The video ended, and the silence that followed was louder than any scream. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I just placed the phone down on the table, neatly, like a receipt, like proof of purchase. And what I'd bought with it? My freedom. I reached for my left hand slowly and slid off the wedding ring he'd given me 5 years ago on a windy beach in Charleston. I remembered how he cried that day, how I believed every word. I held the ring in my palm for a moment, not mourning it, just studying it. Then I placed it next to the phone, on the glass coffee table where they had once toasted champagne the night we moved in. No drama, just finality. And then I turned to her. "He always said you were a mistake," I told her, voice steady. "Turns out he was right. You both are." Her mouth opened slightly, like she wanted to defend herself, but I gave her nothing. Not my anger, not my sadness, not even my attention. She didn't deserve it. Lucas started to say my name, softer this time, as if he could appeal to the part of me that used to love him. But that part wasn't here anymore. She left the moment I pressed play. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to explain. My silence did more damage than 1,000 accusations ever could. They stood there, awkward, exposed, unsure of what came next. But I knew. I'd already rehearsed it in my mind a dozen times on the way here. I walked past them, calm as ever, and headed toward the stairs. Not in retreat, but in reclaiming. This was still my home for now, and I would leave on my terms, not theirs. I heard him say my name again, softer now, desperate. But I didn't respond. He wanted a conversation, a crack in the wall. I gave him nothing. I gathered a few things upstairs, some clothes, documents, the small silver box where I kept the letters he used to write me before we got married. I didn't even read them. I just tossed them into the trash bin and kept packing. I felt strangely light, like I was peeling off a version of myself I didn't need anymore. When I came back down, they were still in the living room, frozen, like statues in a scene they no longer controlled. I wheeled my suitcase past them, opened the door, and paused just once to look back, not at him, but at myself. The version of me who believed love meant loyalty, the version who thought she was safe. I didn't say goodbye. That would have made it personal. In this moment, It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. The air outside felt different, sharper, cleaner, like something had been lifted off my chest the moment that door closed behind me. I didn't cry. I didn't even breathe heavily. I just walked, each step pulling me further away from the lie I'd lived in and closer to the truth I was choosing. I wasn't walking away from a husband. I was walking toward myself. That's what they never expect, the quiet ones to leave loud. But sometimes the loudest thing you can do is simply go. I called a car from the corner of our street. While I waited, I opened my phone, not to scroll through messages or revisit the footage, but to draft an email. Subject line: Dissolution of marriage. Legal inquiry. Cold? Maybe. But clarity has its own kind of warmth. I CC'd a lawyer recommended by a friend months ago, back when she went through her own quiet storm. I never thought I'd need it. But here I was, stronger for knowing when to pull the ripcord. The car arrived. The driver gave me a polite nod, and I slid into the back seat like a woman on a mission. Because I was. I booked a hotel for the night, not far from my office, somewhere with good lighting and clean sheets. I texted my assistant again. Send flowers to the client. Tell them I'll reschedule. Something came up. She replied instantly, handled. I smiled. Not because everything was okay, but because I was. Back in the hotel room, I slipped off my blazer and let my body finally feel the weight of the day. Not the kind of weight that crushes, but the kind that tells you you've just carried something important across a finish line. I didn't pace. I didn't crumble. I poured myself a glass of water, opened my laptop, and began writing. Not a post, not a revenge story, just my truth. A journal entry maybe, or something I'd share one day with someone who needed it. I didn't need a spotlight. I didn't want pity. But I did want to reclaim the narrative. Because for too long I'd told myself that stable was the same as happy, that predictable meant safe. And now I knew better. I was done apologizing for being ambitious, for wanting more, for trusting someone who didn't deserve it. I was done performing gratitude for a life that looked good on the outside, but felt hollow inside. I was done settling. I hit save on the document, titled it "The Day I Walked Out," and closed the lid. Simple as that. No tears. Just truth. And then because I could, I ordered room service. Pasta and red wine. I turned on something light, some old romantic comedy I used to love, and curled up on the crisp white sheets. This wasn't a sad ending. It was a soft landing. And that, I realized, is its own kind of victory. The next morning, I woke up early, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The sun filtered through the curtains like an invitation, not a deadline. I packed my things neatly, checked out of the hotel, and called a cab, not to go back, but forward. I didn't know exactly where I was headed next, and that was the beauty of it. For the first time in a long time, the unknown didn't scare me. It felt like freedom. At the airport, I moved through security like a woman untethered. No alerts on my phone, no husband waiting at home. Just me. A fresh boarding pass and a destination that was mine alone. I found my seat by the window, settled in, and watched the ground begin to shrink beneath us. I reached for my phone, stared at the screen for a long moment, then smiled. And with one small decision, I powered it off. He broke the vow, she broke the illusion. But I broke the cycle, and as the clouds stretched out like a blank page before me, I didn't feel regret. I didn't feel rage. I felt ready to begin again. Not as someone's wife or someone's fool, but as someone who finally chose herself.
My name is Margaret Callie, and I'm 29 years old. If you asked anyone to describe me, they'd probably use the same words Dean once did: steady, predictable, safe. Funny how those words used to sound like compliments until the night he turned them into weapons. I wasn't the girl who lit up the room the moment she walked in. I never pretended to be. I was the one you could count on, the one who remembered deadlines, who showed up on time, who kept promises, even when it wasn't convenient. That part of me came from my father. He worked 2 jobs my entire childhood, but still made it home for dinner every night. He wasn't flashy, but he was dependable. To me, that was love consistency, not chaos. When I met Dean, everything about him felt like the opposite of me. He was impulsive, quick to laugh, and always surrounded by people. If I wanted quiet nights with a book, he wanted rooftop bars and loud music. Where I saved, he spent. Where I planned, he improvised. I'll admit I was drawn to it in the beginning. Dean made me feel like maybe I was too careful, too cautious, and he pulled me into a world of spontaneity I never would have stepped into on my own. For 4 years, I thought we balanced each other out. I paid most of our rent so he could finish his master's degree. I cut corners in my budget, skipped the new car I wanted, passed on nights out with coworkers because I believed I was investing in us. I didn't complain. I wanted him to finish school without debt, to chase his dreams without the weight I knew money could bring. I thought we were building a future together piece by piece. Dean talked about marriage in the way some people talk about vacations, vague, dreamy something someday. Still, he'd drop hints, the kind of wedding he'd want jokes about rings he'd seen in storefronts. I took those as signs, enough to believe that when the time was right, he'd be ready too. So when Dean graduated and landed his first real job, I thought, this is it. We've made it through the hard part. We can finally move forward. I spent 3 months saving for a ring. Not the biggest diamond, but elegant, something classic that I knew he'd appreciate. I planned the proposal down to the detail, the park where we'd had our first real date, the little lake where the city lights reflected in the water. Cheesy maybe, but meaningful. That night my hands were trembling so badly on the steering wheel that I almost couldn't drive. The ring box in my pocket felt like it weighed 10 pounds. I'd practiced what to say over and over, but none of it sounded perfect. In the end, I told myself sincerity mattered more than poetry. I wanted him to know that I wasn't just offering a ring, I was offering a life I'd been quietly building for both of us. Dean was already sitting on a bench when I arrived, scrolling through his phone. He looked up, smiled that disarming smile that had once hooked me completely, and for a moment I let myself believe this would be a story we'd tell our kids someday. I led him to the lake, tried to make conversation about his new job, about how proud I was. He nodded distractedly, half listening, half watching the ducks on the water. My throat went dry, but I pushed forward. Dean, I said, stopping at the spot I'd chosen, we've been through so much together. You make me laugh. You push me to see the world differently, and you make me want to build something real. I can't imagine my life without you. I pulled the ring from my pocket, sank to one knee, and opened the box. His reaction was immediate. He laughed. Not nervous laughter, not shocked laughter. A loud, dismissive, almost mocking laugh. The kind of laugh people give when they've just heard a bad joke. You're serious, he said, smirking. My heart lurched. Of course I'm serious. Dean shook his head, still laughing. Margaret, you honestly think I'd marry? This you're safe, predictable, the girl guys date when they want stability. But marriage, I want passion, I want risk, I want life. Not this. He waved at the ring like it was a toy from a vending machine. The words hit harder than any scream could have. For a moment I thought he'd backpedal, that maybe he'd laugh it off as a bad joke. But he didn't. His eyes were smug, certain. I closed the box, slowly slipped it into my pocket, and stood. My voice was calm, calmer than I felt. Thank you, I said. Dean blinked. For what? For being clear. I turned and walked away, his mocking laugh still echoing in the night air. I don't remember the drive home that night, just the sound of his laughter still ricocheting inside my skull. The ring box sat on the passenger seat like a brick, heavier with every red light I stopped at. By the time I walked into my apartment, I set it on the counter and just stared at it like maybe the universe would blink and give me a different ending. It didn't. I didn't cry, not at first. I just sat there in the dark, my chest hollow, trying to replay 4 years of love and wondering how it could collapse in the span of 30 seconds. Safe, predictable, boring. His words weren't just a rejection of marriage, they felt like a rejection of who I was, of everything I'd given. The next morning, my phone lit up with his name, a text. I didn't mean it like that. Can we talk? I stared at it until the screen went black. No apology, no recognition of the cruelty in his laughter. Just a flimsy backpedal as if I'd imagined it. 2 days later, another message. I think I overreacted. I was surprised, that's all. Maybe we should start over. Start over. like he hadn't crushed me under his smug certainty, like I hadn't watched his eyes gleam with mockery as I knelt before him. I didn't reply. A week passed. Then came a longer message. Look, you know I care about you. I'm just not ready for marriage yet, but I don't want to lose you. Don't throw away what we have. That one nearly got me. Nearly. Because buried under all the arrogance, there was a piece of the Dean I had once loved. The Dean who made me laugh on rainy mornings, who kissed me in grocery store aisles, who once whispered that I was his home. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, the urge to fix, to forgive, pulsing through me like an old habit. But then just as quickly the memory of his face returned. Not soft, not uncertain, but smug. Certain. The kind of certainty that cuts deeper than any blade. I put the phone down and turned it off. Silence became my answer. At first, it was unbearable. I didn't know what to do with the quiet. Nights stretched on endlessly, my apartment echoing with absence. But then something unexpected happened. The silence started to feel like space, a space I could fill with something other than him. I joined a gym at first, just to exhaust myself enough to sleep. The soreness in my muscles became proof that I could still feel something real, something that was mine. I started cooking meals instead of grabbing takeout, savoring the control of choosing what nourished me. Little by little, the heaviness inside me shifted. I wasn't healed, not even close, but each day I went without responding each rep at the gym. Each quiet dinner alone was a brick laid on a new foundation, one that wasn't built around him. And yet in the quietest corners of my mind, his voice still lingered. You'll never do better than me. I didn't know it yet, but that line, that venom disguised as truth, would become the very fire that pushed me forward. Months blurred into each other, each one quieter than the last. My life slowly began to take on a rhythm that didn't include Dean. Work consumed me in a good way. I volunteered for projects I would have once avoided, and people started to notice. I earned a raise not huge, but enough to prove that stability wasn't weakness. It was strength. At the gym, I was no longer just burning energy. I was pushing myself harder, measuring progress in sore muscles and heavier lifts. The mirror, once something I avoided, began to show a version of me I almost didn't recognize, stronger, sharper, more alive. Friends noticed, too. At first, they tiptoed around his name as though saying, Dean out loud might shatter me all over again. Eventually, they stopped avoiding it. That was how I first heard about his new girlfriend. Have you seen her? My coworker Kara whispered at lunch, sliding her phone across the table. I didn't want to look, but curiosity is cruel. There he was grinning in photo after photo, his arm around a woman with long dark hair and a smile that demanded attention. She was everything I wasn't: bold, glamorous. The kind of woman who thrived in the spotlight. Rooftop selfies, champagne glasses clinking, hashtags about living life to the fullest. Kara raised her eyebrows. She's something, huh? I smiled, or at least pretended to. She is. That night, lying in bed, I replayed those images in my mind. Dean's arm wrapped around her waist, the same way it once held mine. His grin was it wider now. Happier had he ever looked at me that way. The bitterness curled tight in my chest. I hated myself for caring, for comparing. I told myself I'd moved on, that I was stronger now. But the truth was I wasn't as immune as I wanted to believe. Still, I didn't stalk, didn't scroll endlessly. I muted his profile, deleted his number from my phone for the 10th time. I wanted the distance, needed it. Yet gossip has a way of sneaking in whether you invite it or not. At a dinner party, a mutual friend leaned closer, lowering his voice, as if spilling a secret. So Dean's new thing. Let's just say it's not as perfect as Instagram makes it look. My fork hovered midair. I forced a casual tone. Oh, he smirked. She's wild. Drama all the time. They fight in public. Honestly, it's exhausting just hearing about it. I nodded, pretending not to care. But inside, I felt a flicker not of hope, but of grim recognition. Dean had wanted passion chaos, the kind of fire that burned too hot to hold, and he'd found it. For a long time, I thought that flicker was satisfaction, even justice. But later I would realize it was something else entirely foreshadowing. Because fires that burn that brightly, they don't last. The first message came late at night, months after the last time I'd seen his name on my screen. I miss you. 2 words. Simple. Dangerous. I stared at them, my thumb, hovering, heart pounding faster than I wanted to admit. It would have been so easy to type back, I miss you too, and pretend none of it had happened. But then I remembered his laugh at the lake, sharp and mocking, and my chest tightened. I set the phone down. I didn't reply. A week later, another message. We were good together. Don't pretend you don't remember. The nerve, the arrogance. And yet I read it twice, maybe 3 times before deleting it. By the 3rd week, his tone shifted. You'll never find anyone who cares like I do. That one made me laugh bitterly. Care was mocking my proposal, his version of caring, or dismissing me as safe and boring. I ignored him again, but the messages kept coming swinging like a pendulum. Apologies laced with nostalgia, then insults dipped in desperation. I was stupid, Margaret. You were the best thing I had. You're still single, right? Figures. Who else would put up with boring? It was like watching him unravel in real time the confidence he once wore like armor cracking at the seams. I should have blocked him, but some part of me, the part that had given him 4 years of my life, couldn't quite cut the cord. Instead, I let his words sit unread, gathering dust in my inbox like dead leaves in a corner. And then fate decided silence wasn't enough. At a friend's birthday dinner, I was laughing with Kara when I felt that familiar prickling sensation of eyes on me. I turned, and there he was, Dean. He looked the same, yet not. Still handsome, still charming on the surface, but thinner somehow, edges frayed. His new girlfriend was nowhere in sight. He carried his glass of wine like it was a lifeline. Margaret, he said, as if the sound of my name on his lips might erase everything between us. I gave a polite nod. Dean. His smile faltered at my tone. He leaned closer. Can we talk? I shook my head lightly. There's nothing to talk about. Come on, he pressed, lowering his voice. You know that night. I didn't mean to. Laugh in my face? I cut in my voice sharper than I expected. The table quieted for a beat, heads turning, but I didn't care. His jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before: desperation. The same man who once told me I'd never do better was standing in front of me begging for another chance. I picked up my glass. Steady hands, steady voice. Dean, the only thing I regret is thinking you deserve the version of me who once believed in you. His face fell. For a second I thought he might argue, but then he just swallowed the arrogance draining from his expression. I turned back to my friends, laughter returning to the table as if nothing had happened. But inside my pulse was racing. Not from longing, not from doubt, but from a strange, intoxicating sense of freedom. For the first time since the lake, I realized I wasn't his anymore. Freedom feels different than I expected. It wasn't a sudden burst of joy or a triumphant scream into the night. It was quieter than that, like finally taking a deep breath after holding it for too long. I didn't meet Elliot in some whirlwind moment. There were no fireworks, no instant rush of adrenaline. We met at a community volunteer event, repainting an old library of all places. He was the guy who stayed late to stack chairs when everyone else left. The one who laughed easily, but not loudly. His steadiness wasn't something he flaunted, it was simply who he was. I remember the first time he asked me to grab coffee afterward. My instinct was hesitation, because hadn't I learned what happened when I gave someone too much of myself? But Elliot didn't push. He just smiled and said, maybe another time, as if the answer didn't determine his worth. And that strangely was what made me say yes the following week. With Elliot, everything was easy. There were no games, no dramatics. He asked about my day and actually listened. When I made a joke dry, sarcastic, the kind most people missed, he laughed, not because he was supposed to, but because he genuinely found it funny. He didn't see my careful budgeting as boring. He saw it as discipline. He didn't call my reliability predictable. He called it trustworthy. For the first time, the parts of me Dean had weaponized felt like gifts. Our relationship grew in quiet moments, late-night cooking experiments, weekend hikes, reading side by side in comfortable silence. There were no rooftop selfies, no hashtags screaming living my best life. Just real life. A life that didn't need to be shouted into the world to matter. The night Elliot proposed wasn't grand, and that was what made it perfect. We were sitting on the floor of my apartment, takeout containers scattered between us, laughing over some ridiculous movie. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small box, and said, I don't need the perfect moment. I just need you. Tears stung my eyes before I could even open the box. It wasn't about the ring, though it was beautiful. It was about the way he looked at me, as if I wasn't a placeholder or a safe option, but his choice, his only choice. Yes, I whispered, my voice breaking. Yes. He slid the ring onto my finger, and I collapsed into his arms, laughing and crying all at once. And just like that, the memory of the Lake of Dean's mocking laugh lost its grip on me. It didn't vanish, scars never do, but it faded, replaced by something stronger. Love, real, steady, imperfect, and mine. Elliot and I walked into the engagement party hand in hand, laughter and music spilling out of the crowded room. Familiar faces greeted us, glasses of champagne raised in celebration. It felt like stepping into a different life, one I wasn't sure I would ever have. And then I saw him. Dean. He noticed me almost instantly. His eyes flicked to my left hand, where Elliot's ring gleamed under the warm lights. I watched the recognition hit the way his smile froze for just a second before he plastered it back on. He made his way over, drink in hand, his charm turned up like a mask. "Wow," he said, his voice smooth but tight around the edges. "You look different." I nodded politely. "Good to see you, Dean. And this must be—" His eyes darted to Elliot. "Elliot," I said, sliding my arm around him. "My fiancé." For a split second, Dean's expression cracked bitterness flashing behind his smile. He recovered quickly, forcing a laugh. "Engaged already. Didn't waste any time, huh?" Elliot simply smiled, his grip on my hand steady. "When you know, you know." Dean tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "Don't you think it's a little fast, Margaret? I mean, after everything we had." I cut him off before he could dig any deeper. My voice was calm, measured. "There is no we, Dean. Hasn't been for a long time." His smile faltered, his jaw tightening. He leaned closer, dropping the pretense. "You really think he's better than me? He's not even—" His eyes flicked over Elliot dismissively. "Half the excitement I gave you." I looked him straight in the eye. "Maybe. But unlike you, he doesn't see me as a mistake." For the first time, Dean had no comeback. His mouth opened, then closed again, words choking before they formed. The arrogance, the smug certainty that had once defined him slipped away, leaving nothing but silence. I gave him a small nod, polite final. "Take care of yourself, Dean." Then I turned back to Elliot, who squeezed my hand without a word. Together we walked away, laughter and music swallowing us back into the party. Behind me, I could feel Dean's eyes burning holes into my back, desperate and hollow. But I didn't look back, because I wasn't his safe option anymore. I was just someone he lost, and someone who had finally stopped caring. My name is Audrey Pickens, and I'm 29 years old. If you met me, you probably wouldn't call me dramatic. I don't scream during arguments, I don't throw plates or storm out of rooms. I've always believed composure was its own kind of strength. My dad used to tell me, "Don't raise your voice, Audrey. Raise your standards." Those words stuck with me long after he passed. They became part of me, a quiet mantra pulsing underneath every choice I made. For a while, Ethan said he loved that about me. He'd tell people Audrey's steady. She makes me feel grounded. He once traced his fingers down my arm and whispered, "You make me feel safe." I believed him. I believed in us. We had been together for 2 years. I met him at a mutual friend's game night, one of those evenings where laughter feels too loud in a cramped apartment and the smell of pizza clings to your clothes. Ethan was magnetic. He leaned back in his chair, tossing out sarcastic one-liners that made everyone double over. He thrived in the spotlight. And then there was me, the quiet one on the couch, sipping wine, watching the chaos with a soft smile. I didn't chase attention, I observed. But somehow Ethan noticed me in the stillness. He made his way across the room and asked what I was thinking. No one had asked me that all night. At first, it was intoxicating. He liked that I cooked for him after long shifts, that I remembered how he took his coffee, that I didn't play games. He told me I was different, stable, supportive, easy to be around. He liked that I didn't try to compete with his stories or fight for attention. For months, I thought I had found the balance we both needed, his fire and my calm. But the longer we were together, the more the compliments shifted into something else. "You're so responsible," turned into God, Audrey. "You're such a rule follower. Thanks for planning." That weekend trip became, "You never do anything spontaneous." Little barbs coated in laughter, always brushed off as teasing. I tried not to let them sting. I told myself he was stressed or tired or just didn't realize how sharp his words could be. But then came the comparisons. Not constant at first, just little throwaway comments. One night I brought home dinner from a new restaurant. He smiled, kissed my cheek, then casually added, "Jessica." Used to surprise me with stuff like this all the time. Jessica, his ex. The first time her name slipped into conversation, Ethan was sprawled on the couch with a beer in hand. He said Jessica had been too much, too controlling. He shook his head and added, "Sometimes I miss how passionate she was, though." I let it go. Everyone has an ex who lingers in memory, blurred by nostalgia. Nostalgia lies. It makes people forget the bruises and remember the kisses. But Jessica's name kept surfacing. Not in tender ways, not in confessions of longing, but always as some kind of twisted benchmark. Jessica would have done it differently. Jessica never second-guessed herself. Jessica was exciting. The irony was impossible to ignore. Ethan had once cried, telling me how Jessica tracked his phone, showed up at his job uninvited, and maxed out his credit card before disappearing for 3 days. He had called her toxic. He had said I was his peace after the storm. And yet, here he was romanticizing her chaos. I tried harder. I planned spontaneous trips, said yes to last-minute concerts, let him take the lead on choices I normally would have overthought. But the more I gave, the more restless he seemed. It was as if every gesture of stability on my part only reminded him of the drama he thought he was missing. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if what he wanted wasn't love at all, but attention. Any attention. Even the destructive kind. Sometimes I caught myself studying him across the room, beer bottle in hand, laughter echoing as he leaned into conversations that didn't include me. And in those moments, something heavy pressed into my chest, the sense that I was slowly being erased. I told myself love was work, that maybe all relationships had their uneven stretches. But deep down, I felt it a crack forming. The kind you can't tape over with romantic weekends or whispered reassurances. Still, I stayed. Because part of me hoped the man from that first game night, the one who noticed me in the quiet, was still in there somewhere. But hope is dangerous. And looking back, I realized the truth was already clawing at the edges. Ethan didn't miss Jessica. He missed the chaos she brought. And chaos doesn't know how to love. Ethan's complaints about me being too predictable had become routine by the time Madison's rooftop birthday rolled around. I'd been trying, God, I had been trying. I'd said yes to last-minute plans, booked spontaneous day trips, even let him pick our dinner spots without me checking the reviews first. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. He thrived on chaos, and I wasn't chaos. That night, the city stretched out beneath Madison's rooftop like glitter scattered across black velvet. The music pulsed low, glasses clinked. Laughter rose and fell with the wind. Ethan grabbed his first drink within minutes, and by the time we'd been there half an hour, he was already on his third. His charm always got louder with alcohol, the kind of charisma that was less about warmth and more about spectacle. I hung back smiling politely at introductions offering to help with food trays. Ethan, meanwhile, was basking under the string lights, retelling the same story for the third time because people laughed louder each round. When he finally gestured to me, it wasn't with affection. "This is Audrey," he announced to the circle around him. He draped his arm lazily over my shoulder, his words slightly slurred. "The reliable one. She makes sure I pay my bills on time and drink water before bed." Everyone chuckled. I smiled, thinly, heat crawling up my neck. He wasn't done. "She's not going to throw me off a balcony like Jessica once threatened." Upgrade right. The group erupted. I stood still, my lips pressed together. Their laughter stung more than his words. I told myself to breathe, to let it slide, but the night wasn't done testing me. Later, when we were sitting on low couches near the heaters, Ethan pulled out his phone. "Look at this place," he said, showing his friends glossy photos of a luxury apartment downtown. "I'm thinking of signing the lease." I frowned. "You're signing it?" He grinned like this was some romantic surprise. "Well, we'll both be on the lease. Obviously." It was the first I'd heard of it. I kept my voice low. "Ethan, we haven't even talked about this. That's a 12-month lease. Downtown rent isn't cheap." He rolled his eyes and turned his head deliberately toward his friends. "Here we go." "I'm not trying to argue," I said, keeping my tone calm. "I'm saying we should talk privately." But Ethan smirked, leaned back, and with his voice loud enough for the circle to hear, said, "This is what I mean. She can't make a decision unless it's in a spreadsheet." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter moved through the group. I sank back, cheeks burning. And then he snapped. "You're not a real woman, Audrey." His words sliced through the chatter like glass breaking. His eyes narrowed, cruel, fueled by liquid courage. "Jessica would never say no to me. She just handled things. You're scared of everything." The music didn't stop. The conversations didn't freeze. But the air around us did. A couple of his friends glanced away. One muttered something about getting another drink. I stared at him, and the man who once said I made him feel safe. At the man who had cried in my arms about Jessica's cruelty. Now, in front of strangers, he was holding me up against her ghost and declaring me less than. I didn't yell. I didn't throw my drink in his face like some dramatic heroine. That's what he wanted, drama, a scene, something to feed off. Instead, I stood, quietly. I finished the last sip of my wine, set the glass gently on the table, and adjusted the strap of my purse. I didn't look at him, didn't look at anyone. I simply walked out. The music followed me to the elevator, muffled by distance until the doors closed and silence wrapped around me like armor. That was the last time I saw Ethan. at least for a while. When I left that rooftop party, I didn't just leave Ethan standing there with his smirk and his glass raised halfway to his lips. I left the entire version of myself that tolerated him. The next morning, I packed my belongings into boxes. It was astonishing how little of our apartment was actually ours. Most of the furniture had been mine to begin with. The books, the kitchenware, the small plants lined up on the windowsill, mine too. Ethan's contribution was the TV, a pair of sneakers left in the hallway, and the heavy air of his presence. By the time he came home from work that day, I was gone. The key sat on the counter, no note beneath it. I blocked his number before he could call. Social media gone. Payment apps gone. Every crack he could use to wedge himself back into my life, I sealed. The silence that followed was louder than any fight we'd ever had. At first, Ethan treated it like a joke. Texts from unknown numbers started popping up. "So you're ghosting me, that's cute. You'll come crawling back." It was just a party. I was drunk. Grow up. I didn't reply. 2 days later, the tone shifted. "You seriously moved out without a word. You're overreacting. We were supposed to talk things through. This is childish." "Fine. If you want to stay gone, stay gone." And still I stayed gone. By the end of the week, desperation seeped through his words. "Please, Audrey. 1 coffee. 5 minutes. I messed up. You know I didn't mean it. You're not even going to give me a chance." I read every word but never responded. Because the truth was simple, he had already told me what he meant. "You're not a real woman. Jessica would never say no to me." That wasn't drunken slur. That was honesty soaked in alcohol stripped of filters. And I believed him. The outside pressure began soon after. His best friend texted me. "He's been crying for days. No one deserves to be ignored like this." Then a mutual friend messaged me on Instagram, "At least hear him out. You don't have to forgive him." They meant well, but they hadn't been there. They hadn't felt the sting of public humiliation, the way he twisted my loyalty into ridicule. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I just deleted their messages and removed them from my life too. It was cleaner that way. That weekend, I found myself at a small cafe with Lena, a coworker I'd only ever shared polite office chatter with. When she noticed the dark circles under my eyes, she asked if I was all right. The question broke something in me, though I didn't cry. Instead, I admitted flatly I moved out of my apartment. I don't really have anywhere to stay. She didn't ask for details. She didn't pry into wounds. She just slid a key across the table and said, "I have a guest room. You don't owe me anything. Just take it." I stared at her, stunned. That night, I carried my boxes into her modest apartment. The walls smelled faintly of lavender, the guest bed neatly made. She set down a spare blanket at the foot and smiled. "You don't owe anyone your peace, Audrey." No one had ever said that to me before. In the days that followed, Lena gave me something Ethan never did: space without punishment. We ate quiet dinners together, half-laughed about work gossip, watched shows from opposite ends of the couch. Nothing more. No expectations. Just peace. Meanwhile, Ethan's attempts escalated. New numbers lit up my phone almost daily. I knew it was him before I opened them. "Jessica blocked me. No one else cares about me the way you do. I didn't even want that apartment. I just wanted a future with you. You ruined it. Don't you miss me?" Each message was a thread he tried to tug on, but I had already cut the rope. One night he sent me a voice note. The waveform bounced across my screen, pleading silently. I didn't press play. I just deleted it. Another time he tried Venmo, sending me a single dollar with the note, "Can we talk?" I hit block again. And with every boundary I reinforced, I felt myself breathing easier. Nights stretched longer without anxiety gnawing at my chest. Mornings felt lighter without his voice echoing in my head. For the first time in years, silence felt like freedom. And the strangest part, the more Ethan spiraled in his desperation, the calmer I became. I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't waiting for an apology or hoping he'd change. I was free. Ethan was the kind of man who couldn't stand being ignored. He fed on reactions, anger, tears, pleading. Silence to him was starvation. And I had cut off his food supply. The messages didn't stop. If anything, they multiplied. New numbers, new accounts, all with the same desperate cadence. "I know I messed up. Please, Audrey. We had something real. Don't throw it away. He wasn't who I thought he was, but you were. No one looks at me the way you did. Don't leave me with nothing." I never replied. Instead, I watched from a distance as his life began to unravel. Friends who once defended him started going quiet. Through whispers from mutual acquaintances, I heard about bar fights, his voice rising above the music until bouncers had to drag him out. He got into a shouting match with one of his closest friends, stormed off, and didn't come back. He lost a freelance client after missing deadlines, his excuses running dry. Then came the stories of him crying in parking lots, drinking too much, crashing his car into a pole. No one was hurt, but the accident left his hood crumpled and his pride shattered. All of this, and still he reached for me. The irony wasn't lost on me. I used to believe his chaos was passion, his intensity proof of love. But now, from a safe distance, I saw the truth. It wasn't passion, it was hunger. A gnawing need to be wanted, even if it destroyed everything around him. And without my attention to feed on, he was starving. One night, Lena walked into our office break room, holding her phone, brows furrowed. "You're not going to believe this," she said, sliding the screen toward me. Ethan had followed her on Instagram. Not only followed, he'd scrolled back a year and liked 2 of her photos. "What is he trying to do?" Lena asked, shaking her head. "Mark territory that isn't his." I sighed. "He's spiraling." "No," she said, setting the phone down. "He's watching." Her words landed heavy. Ethan wasn't reaching for me anymore. He was circling the people around me, testing how close he could get before I flinched. But I didn't. If anything, his desperation only made the distance between us feel wider. For every text I deleted, every account I blocked, I grew lighter, stronger. My days were filling with things that had nothing to do with him. I started running again, a habit I'd abandoned, because Ethan complained I spent too much time outside. I cooked new recipes with Lena, laughing when the smoke alarm went off. We spent quiet evenings on her couch, sometimes talking, sometimes saying nothing at all, and it was enough. Ethan had once told me my calm made him feel safe. What he really meant was that I was his net when he fell his cushion when the chaos crashed down. But I wasn't his net anymore, and without it, he was tumbling. The last shred of pity I felt for him evaporated when I heard about his latest spiral. A mutual friend sent me a screenshot of a Facebook post, Ethan and Jessica back at it again. A public fight outside a bar, shouting so loud the cops were called. No one was arrested, but the scene was messy enough that his parents had to pick him up. Jessica blocked him the next day. The Audrey from 2 years ago would have felt vindicated, would have thought, see, he got what he deserved. But standing in Lena's kitchen that night, stirring pasta as she poured us both glasses of wine, I realized I didn't feel anything. Not joy, not revenge, not even relief. Just nothing. Because Ethan's life was no longer mine. His downfall wasn't my responsibility. Silence had done its work. And though he didn't know it yet, silence would be the final nail in the coffin between us. It was a Friday night, the kind where the city outside hummed with weekend energy. But inside Lena's apartment, it was quiet. Lena had gone to visit her family, leaving me alone with her plants, her couch, and a reheated bowl of leftover curry. I was halfway through a documentary when I heard a knock at the door. It wasn't loud, just soft, hesitant. For a second, I thought maybe it was a neighbor. When I opened the door, my stomach sank. Ethan. He stood on the porch under the yellow glow of the hallway light, looking nothing like the man I once fell for. His hair was unkempt, eyes, bloodshot jacket, far too thin for the weather. His hands trembled slightly as he shoved them into his pockets. "Hi," he said, voice soft, almost rehearsed. He gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I didn't move. I was just walking around. He continued, glancing past me into the apartment. Didn't have anywhere else to go. His voice cracked, but I knew the performance. I'd seen it before, the slump of the shoulders, the feigned vulnerability, the damsel in distress act he'd once mocked in others. He wanted me to feel sorry for him. "I don't want to fight," he said quickly, stepping half an inch closer. I miss you, Audrey." The words landed like a stone, skipping over water. Once they would have broken me open. Now they barely rippled. I didn't move aside. I didn't soften. "You knew what you had," I said, my voice low, steady. "You just didn't care." For the first time, his expression cracked. He hadn't expected that. "I didn't mean what I said that night," he rushed, eyes wide. "You know I was drunk angry." "You meant every word I interrupted." "Because drunk you isn't different. He's just honest." He flinched. The silence between us grew heavy. "I just need 5 minutes," he whispered, his voice breaking now for real. "Please, 5 minutes to talk. That's all I'm asking." I looked at him for a long time, the way you might study a painting you used to love, but now only see cracks in. And then I closed the door. No slam, no dramatic flourish, just the quiet click of finality. For a few seconds, I heard him breathing on the other side, maybe waiting, maybe hoping the door would open again. It didn't. Eventually, his footsteps faded down the hall. I sat back on the couch, curry untouched, documentary, paused, heart steady. No shaking hands, no tears, just calm. The kind of calm that comes when you realize the storm is outside and you're finally safe inside. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of him. 2 weeks passed. After the night, Ethan appeared at Lena's door. No more knocks, no new numbers. just silence. For a while, I wondered if maybe that was it. Maybe he had finally accepted the ending. But people like Ethan don't disappear. They recalculate. When the invitation to a mutual friend's engagement party landed in my inbox, I almost deleted it. The thought of walking into a room full of familiar faces, faces that once looked at us as a couple, filled me with unease. Lena nudged me into going. "You've already moved on," she said, setting her glass down with that quiet certainty she carried like armor. Why hide it? She was right. So I went. The venue buzzed with celebration balloons tied to chairs, champagne flutes, clinking people laughing too loudly in a room too small. I wore a simple black dress, hair pulled back, nothing extravagant. I didn't want attention. I just wanted closure, even if I didn't know it yet. For the first hour, I kept to myself. Made small talk, congratulated the couple, found a quiet corner on the patio where the noise dulled. And then I heard it. That laugh. My body went still before my mind caught up. I turned slowly, and there he was, Ethan. He stood by the bar, drink in hand, leaning too close to a woman I didn't recognize, dressed like he'd tried too hard to look casual. His eyes flicked across the room, scanning until they landed on me. Our gazes locked. For a second, the entire room blurred. Just me and him tethered by a history I'd already cut loose. He broke away from his group and came straight toward me. "Hey," he said, a little breathless, as though running across the room was some kind of grand gesture. "Didn't think I'd see you here." I nodded once. "It's a small city." He laughed awkwardly, looked down at his shoes, then back at me. "Audrey, I want to say I'm really sorry. For everything. For that night. For how I treated you." I said nothing. He took my silence as permission. Words spilled out of him in a frantic rush. I didn't mean what I said. You know that, right? I was drunk. I was trying to impress my friends. It was stupid. You were always so calm, and His voice cracked. I was scared. It felt like you didn't care. Finally, I spoke. "I was calm because I trusted you, Ethan. Because I thought we were partners. Turns out I was alone the whole time." He blinked hard, like he hadn't expected honesties to cut sharper than any insult. "Jessica wasn't who I thought she was," he whispered. "She used me. I was so stupid." "You weren't stupid," I corrected softly. "You were selfish. You knew exactly what you were doing. You just didn't think I'd walk away." His face twisted. "I just needed to feel wanted. She made me feel that way. You didn't." I tilted my head, studied him like a stranger. "So it was my fault you compared me to her. My fault you degraded me in front of a crowd." He opened his mouth, then shut it. "No," he muttered weakly. "I didn't cheat." I almost laughed. "No, you just humiliated me publicly and chased the same woman you used to cry about. That's not cheating. That's pathetic." Anger flashed across his face. "You think you're better than me now, don't you?" "No," I said calmly. "I've always been better. I just didn't realize it until you showed me who you really are." For a long moment we stood there, his eyes searching mine, waiting for a crack, a flinch, some sign that his words still had power. They didn't. "Audrey." I turned to see Lena standing at my side, her voice steady, her presence grounding. "You ready to go?" I nodded. I looked back at Ethan one final time. "I hope you figure yourself out, but I won't be part of the mess you leave behind." Then I walked out with Lena. Ethan didn't follow. Months have passed since that engagement party. Ethan's name doesn't come up anymore. Not in group chats, not in whispers, from mutual friends, not even in my own thoughts. Sometimes I still see his ghost. A new social media profile with fewer followers than the last. Posts that try too hard, filtered smiles, captions clawing for attention. I don't block them anymore. I don't need to. Because the truth is, some ghosts haunt you. Others fade the moment you stop chasing them. Ethan faded. I didn't win anything. I didn't get revenge. I just stopped giving him power. And without that power, he's nothing more than a name I used to know. My life, though, it's become something softer, stronger. I run again long stretches through quiet streets where the air fills my lungs instead of dread. I cook with Lena new recipes that leave the counters messy and the apartment smelling like garlic and basil. We take walks on weekends, sometimes to the park, sometimes to a coffee shop Ethan used to hate because it was too quiet. Now I love it for that very reason. The silence that once felt empty has become full. Full of mornings where I don't check my phone in fear. Full of evenings where laughter bubbles up naturally instead of being forced. Full of people who don't drain me just to feed their own chaos. Lena never asks for more than I can give. She doesn't demand drama, doesn't pull me into her orbit just to watch me spin. She simply shows up with steady kindness, with warmth that doesn't scorch. Whether our bond turns into love or stays a rare friendship, I don't know yet. But I know this, it's healthy, it's real, and it's mine. Ethan once sneered, "You're not a real woman." I think about that sometimes, the cruelty of it, the way he wielded those words like a weapon in front of strangers. But now I see it for what it was, projection. He needed me to be small, so he could feel big. But silence showed him something else. It showed him that I didn't need to shout to have the last word. I didn't need revenge or grand gestures. The worst punishment for someone like Ethan wasn't anger, it wasn't begging, it wasn't even closure. It was indifference, and I had more than enough of that to give. So when I wake in the mornings now, sunlight spilling across fresh sheets, I don't think about Ethan anymore. I don't think about Jessica or the rooftop party or the countless messages left unread. I think about coffee warming in my hands, about the quiet hum of a day waiting to unfold, about the woman I became the moment I chose myself over his chaos. And that silence, it says everything.